Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul Deligre, your host, and we have a star-studded crew here today. As you can see, we've got a few folks on, and let me make some introductions here. First, we have Terry Murray, who is the president of Prescriptive Data Solutions. We have Joe Galvan, the VP of Engineering at Prescriptive Data Solutions. We've got Stephen Sepulveda, principal architect at Prescriptive. And John Parker, the Network and Security Practice Manager at Prescriptive. How you doing, John? But our guest today really is Joe Ross. He's the Executive Director of IT Infrastructure at Waste Connections. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so really kind of what we wanted to talk about today is, disaster recovery, cyber recovery, and how it's kind of evolved over the years. And I think we have a good mix of people here. Terry is obviously a technical guy. He's the president of Prescriptive, so he can look at things from a business owner standpoint. Now we've got a few technical guys on the team, and of course your view, Joe Ross, I should say, is important because you're coming from an end user standpoint. We deal with customers like yours all the time, so I think we've got a good mix of perspectives here on the show today. So welcome everybody. Appreciate everyone taking time out of their day for this. It should be a fun conversation.
All right.
So, well, I kind of like these are such a wide ranging conversations. I'll kind of start with you, Terry, and kind of give some definitions of what cybersecurity was in the past and what disaster recovery and business continuity was in the past, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thanks, Paul. I think there's some other guys that can dig into really the details of it, but I think a lot of it has to do with how your applications and your data is much more distributed than it used to be, right? You used to have everything within your core data center. That's where everything lived. So certainly now it's much more distributed, whether you're using traditional cloud or certainly using SaaS, right? So that would be one of the first things that I think people are trying to wrestle with is, okay, it's not all in this one place now. You certainly got different options for the different technologies. If you go back 10, 15 years, it was still primarily, I would say, backups and then looking to do some sort of recovery on site. We had organizations that, were really mission critical that would do a full blown DR solution where you could get down to, minutes or hours to do a recovery, at least for the most critical apps. One of the interesting things now is the price to actually do that has dropped dramatically to where before, if that was this top echelon of companies that could afford to do that, now a lot more of them have the ability to do that, leveraging cloud or leveraging different solution providers. And then on the security side, obviously that's changed dramatically, and John can speak to that more, but the ransomware stuff just as prevalent as it always has been. And then not just ransoming, but now in some cases, we're going to expose your data. So it's not just that we're encrypting you and you can't have access to it. We're going to publish it for everybody out there to see. And it just seems like it's much more, everyone's a target, right? And there's not a whole lot that you can necessarily do to not be a target, right? And that's one of the things that we'll see sometimes is you still find that with small companies where they feel like, hey, nobody's going to come after me from a hacking perspective. And I think what they miss is just that there are certainly organizations that are specifically targeted, but in a lot of cases that's not it at all. They're just looking for a hole, right? And if you have one, and then maybe you're not good for $1 million, but maybe you're good for 50K, and they'll take your 50K just as much as they'll take $1 million from this other guy. So it's gotten a lot more complex, I think, but the cost to implement some real solutions is attainable for folks. And I guess the last thing I would say is that it used to be that the true disasters that we came across were pretty rare. Right. Yeah. It wasn't that common to have somebody's data center get flooded or the building burned down or, even you have crashes on gear, but now in any given year, we'll have multiple customers that get some sort of impact from a cybersecurity perspective that requires a recovery. And when you watch, that's a dramatic difference, one organization's ability to recover versus another, right? You've seen them where they're able to recover for the most part within hours. And then we've seen some where you're talking months to kind of recover, right? So it's an interesting dynamic out there right now.
Well, thanks, Terry. I think we'll jump to John Parker, and Terry had mentioned some, the cybersecurity aspects of it. John, what's your take on how this has evolved over the years?
Well, I guess one of the things I'll call out is the methods in which we used to do like our backups. We joke about the days of tape and things like that, offsite and offline backups, air gapped, all of those technologies, which is really funny because that mechanism in which we used to do all the time is actually what saves us today. Right now, the process is changing, whether it's immutable backups or whatever, but the idea of keeping those backups off somewhere else that can't be tainted or touched or whatever, and then we're using them as our source of truth to recover, it's still true today. It's just we're doing it a different way, right? And we have to use it because of those mechanisms. The problem that we've really run into, to Terry's point about the cost going down, being able to do backups and leveraging SaaS tools and things like that, is that they're not as separated as they once were, right? It was very easy to say, hey, here's my tape backup. I'm going to put it in this locked cabinet somewhere, and it's safe for the next 90 days or whatever it is, that until I go and write over it. But now, if my backup solution is readily available and it's always being pushed and it's always being backed up, and I'm backing up the bad guys' content, their malware, whatever it is, into my system, and I'm not inspecting it, or I'm not safeguarding it, or it's not stored for long-term retention, I just reintroduce the same problem back into it. So from a cybersecurity standpoint, there are some early day mechanisms that we should still be using today. We just need to modernize them. And we're seeing them take place. Like I said, again, immutable backups has been a big one, right? Is saying, hey, these backups can't be modified. They can't be changed. We know that they are exactly as they were when we took them. So that's just another mechanism, that whole thing of like the offline tape backup. So that'd be the first thing I talk about is that's where we're falling short, is the mechanisms we're using need to be, adapted to the modern threat in that landscape. And then the other part of it true for everything is that our exposure rate is much higher than it used to be. Go back in time, maybe you had a firewall, maybe you just had an internet router, whatever it is, but we weren't getting blasted on the front end all the time. Bad guys trying to, hack in, or whatever the way it was that you describe it. The unfortunate truth is now we're letting them in, whether that's by letting our identities be compromised and then they're just logging in, or it's just the fact that we've got an overexposure of applications that are inside of our environment that are just inherently weak for whatever reason. And it just is what it is. But the end result is that our exposure, our attack surface, is so much higher than it used to be that it's become so much more important that we address that recovery mechanism, right? Because the traditional way of doing it is we've got to be able to get back up faster. We've got to be able to bring more systems up, because before it was like, hey, I got this one web server here that's my whole business, or a spreadsheet, right? Whatever that was, our whole business run. That's not the case anymore. It's like we've got servers upon servers, data center upon data center that our entire business needs to run off of. And we can't take, to Terry's point earlier, months to get back up and running. Like if we take more than a week in downtime, our business might fail, right? I mean, that's a reality of the current situation. And that's where, again, to the point of the message, is traditional disaster recovery is not, it's failing us. We need to modernize and take a different approach.
Hey, John, one of the things that you said was, you talked about it, how it's immediate, right? And I was thinking about, we had a customer that had a third party managing their firewall. They misconfigured it, right? That left it open. And it wasn't like it sat there for 6 months and they eventually had some sort of breach. It was near immediate, right? It was like, as soon as that hole was open, they came in, right?
It was within minutes.
Within minutes. That's shocking, right? It's like this is going on real time constantly. And one little slip up, and now you have a major issue.
Yeah, Terry, and I would think with AI and all the automation tools out there, the bad guys are just as good at it as we are sometimes, trying to defend against it. they're having all the tools to really accelerate that, I would think.
Definitely. And they're on the offensive, right? So they can take a proactive approach at it, and then we have to be reactive in the way that we protect against that. So it's tough.
I think the architecture's just changed, right? So it's changed the whole game. You have the traditional backups, protecting your data. But to access that data, you need services that are provided through the cloud and these modernized networks. So it's not just about data all the time and how you recover. Right. You can recover your data all day long, but if your identity service is down, you can't access any of the data. So there's a lot of unique challenges as time has gone on the last 20 years. And you think about, traditional companies, we had one firewall protect our data center. It was very easy. I had one window in, so it was really easy to layer services and protect it. Now I have 3 different clouds, 50 different service providers. My data is all over the place. How do you secure all that? How do you back it up? And, so I look at it, disaster recovery for services and data, because, I think they're like 2 different components of, recovery. So.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the big ones when you're looking at DR and being able to fail over, right? Everybody thinks about, okay, these are my critical applications, but then here's all the infrastructure and the infrastructure services that you're going to need to be able to access those things and actually do things that sometimes get overlooked. I think one of the things we've seen too is documentation and understanding of your environment. It's interesting to watch the companies that seem to have a very good handle on this is all of our stuff, this is our landscape, this is where it is and how it works. When something happens, their ability to recover is pretty good. Where some of the ones we've seen that really struggle is, one, not having a great handle on their backups, so they don't really understand, or you go and look and not everything was really protected that you thought, and then not knowing where everything really is, not understanding your systems, the order that they have to come up and what pieces are integrated. It's crucial, right?
Yeah, I think there's been a change in the industry. I think in the old days, it was a DR runbook is what everybody strived to have. And it was pretty straightforward, right? If the primary site goes down, then follow this DR runbook and bring up the secondary site. Now it's more of a cyber recovery runbook, which is totally different because that's more of a business recovery plan. And it's not only just IT. Now you're bringing in, the different parts of the business. If you get compromised, ransomware hits your organization, you're going to have to communicate to the public what happened, and you're bringing in HR and other departments within your organization, and it becomes a lot more complicated and something that you need to test and do, tabletop exercises and just go through that entire scenario and make sure your organization is prepared. And that's, with cyber insurance and with, the board organizations are looking at their IT to make sure that they can recover in a timely manner. So it's a lot more complex nowadays, and there's a lot more components like Joe mentioned earlier, the identity and the multi-cloud and, just having services all over the place and making sure those all work during a recovery procedure is critical.
Definitely. And the ordering and the dependency, right? What do you need to bring up first? Obviously, you have things like identity and DNS that are going to be, first priority of recovery, but then how do you bring up the applications? How do you test and validate those? How do you do that, in a cyber recovery? How do you do that in a known, clean environment before promoting it to public? And then the next step of that would be getting your users to that new environment, right? If you don't do it in place, which brings in a lot of the networking aspects that I know are often overlooked, right? But in either case, like if you're making those changes, how are you doing segmentation for clean room recovery? And then how are you promoting that up to production as you know that it's ready and validated?
Yeah, and I think I keep saying identity. That's the one that keeps me up at night, to be honest. Most people are hybrid today, whether they're intra, Okta, it doesn't really matter who your provider is. that's really the single factor. I mean, and I've been bitten by it. When the CrowdStrike came out and they did the patch that took down a lot of Microsoft, it took down my identity for 2.5 hours. And I had to answer to a board and say, hey, well, what's our plan? I don't have a plan. If I have no identity, I'm the whole playbook is done. There is nothing. My servers are fine. I just can't access anything. And that's probably the single point of failure for me. I mean, it doesn't happen that much, but they all have them. I've seen Okta have outages, Intras had outages, Pings had outages. So, they're all having problems just like us. Whether it's a 1 hour or 2 hour, I haven't seen anything that's been substantial, but it's a big impact to the business. How do we recover from it? I mean, we're pretty good at backups and doing all these things, but identity is one of those ones where, I mean, that's the holy grail of everything. Well, no identity, you're done.
And I know in your environment, you do a lot of acquisitions, have a lot of domains, try to consolidate those domains as much as possible. But at the rate of acquisitions, it's always a challenge, just given the number of domains and, identity providers and sources that you would need to protect. So, can you kind of like share a little bit about that in terms of like what you're looking to do and how you're planning to approach with the team?
It's interesting because we're a decentralized model. So to your point, we run about 180 different domains, not just one. Today we operate about 5 different tenants across 3 different clouds, whether it's GCP, Azure, AWS. We always strive to centralize everything, but it's I think most IT things are, and all our tool sets are around centralizing. Well, my business plan is decentralization, so it makes it really challenging. And when I look at our disaster recovery plans and I look at all the things that we have to do and the challenges we face, I mean, we're kind of unique just because we're like a consultant to, 400 different businesses. When people think of Waste Connections, they think of a trash company, and we're so much more than a trash company. We're in the oil and gas. We're in the logistics business, not just trash. So a lot of applications, a lot of clouds. Some applications are native born in the cloud. That's a different type of playbook for disaster recovery and services. And what we found with the whole API deployments over the last 5 years, everybody wanted to go front end with APIs. Well, now you got applications. You buy one application and it depends on 9 other or 10 different other applications or services. So you got alerts coming at you faster every day. There's always an outage, some service. This API went down. This real-time dashboard didn't go. So, I don't know if we necessarily had the best plan. I'm learning. I think it's a constant thing that we're changing and evolving as things get thrown at us. We haven't had any substantial outages or anything like that. I mean, we do a lot of, I always like to say we do a backup of a backup. We do all the traditional things and some of the new ones. But the challenge is with the whole CI/CD pipelining and everything, changes is happening every day. So it's hard for traditional infrastructure data center guys to know every little change. And that's probably my biggest challenge today.
Yeah, keeping up with what you don't know, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And anybody that says they know everything I would challenge them, right? I mean, I'm running 500 applications to run a $12 million business. I mean, I don't even have 500 people in IT. So you got guys wearing multiple hats, and I think AI is going to bridge a lot of those gaps, and that's obviously what we're kind of doing now. But there's still some work to be done. Yeah.
I mean, in general, how do you stay ahead of that? And I'll kind of throw that up to the group, because with the ever-changing technologies out there, what are the best practices for you guys to stay ahead of this?
I would say it's you have to learn from your mistakes, and it's like podcasts like these and listening to other people's experience. I believe in a partner program because my head's down and I only look at Waste Connections, but what are my other peers out there dealing with? You used to use your voice as your password. Well, with AI and all these new tools, I can get past that in 2 seconds, right? So the game is changing all the time. So, you constantly have to learn. And I think communication and small little groups that talk about these things are probably the most beneficial for me. anyways, because I think we learn from one another, right? We're all come from different backgrounds, but we're all doing one thing, delivering data and services and keeping things up and operational. There's different attacks that may hit prescriptive versus waste connections. I've learned a lot of new attacks when you start getting into the pipeline business, oil and gas. That's a whole different attack sector than a trash business. So, but I think communication in small groups is probably how I stay on top of things, or try to stay on top of things.
Well, good. Well, thanks, Joe. That was appreciate that. I know it. Again, we have different perspectives here. Stephen, what are your thoughts on that? How do you stay ahead of it?
I think testing is critical. I think organizations that do cyber recovery scenarios and tabletop exercises at least once or twice a year, just to make sure that their recovery environment is what they think it is, make sure the network is set up correctly, make sure all the routing's in place. And the only way you can verify that is to do extensive testing. And I think if you don't, you're really leaving yourself open to gaps that you might miss that you won't really run into until you actually have a serious event that takes place. And again, I think this is a multifaceted problem. Ransomware hits all different layers. I think the backup or data protection is just one layer in the whole equation here. So I think it's very challenging, and just doing research daily on the security angle of IT is a challenge, keeping up with things, and the bad guys are advancing pretty much faster than the good guys. So it's like it's just constantly evolving, and you can never rest on your laurels in this business. So it's all about research and testing.
Yeah, I think just extending on that a little bit, the tabletops are really good, particularly outside of IT, involving the business as a whole and getting the stakeholders, particularly where decision making probably needs to happen, right? Because it's kind of easy. I say easy. Once you have those things relatively practiced, you have recovery mechanisms, it's a solved thing for IT to say, hey, we can recover, we can fail over users. This is approximately how much time it's going to take. You're going to be giving the inputs to the business on those factors as far as the feasibility of the recovery, right? But knowing who's making the decisions in the room, I've seen it myself, multiple, even people with good foundational recovery ability, and were able to recover. A lot of the struggle was kind of muddling through that decision making up top, right? Because there's a lot of panic, and having, kind of certainty around that. And then the other parts of the business having the exposure to what that looks like is immensely valuable.
And Joe, I was thinking about when you were talking about that with DR, right? You'll talk with the customer and they say, we want to be able to fail over across the globe in sub 5 minutes. You say, okay, that sounds awesome. How are you doing on your backups? Oh, we're not getting good backups. And so, well, maybe we start there. I think we see some of that on cyber recovery too, right? Where sometimes folks will fall in love with some advanced technology, but then you go and you talk to them or you look at their environment and you realize, hey, you really don't even have multi-factor authentication properly implemented in your environment. You don't have endpoint protection on all these systems. You're not watching for configuration drift, all the basic blocking and tackling, right? And it seems to me that some of those, how you look at them and go about them might have changed some, but it's those fundamentals that folks, a lot of cases when they have a breach, that's where it happens. And it's not because, well, you didn't have a technology that would have prevented this. You probably did, but it wasn't configured, it wasn't managed, it wasn't monitored. So, sometimes you go in and it's sitting there screaming it's been telling you for a month that you have this issue, but nobody was looking at it or did anything about it.
There's certainly that, but even if all that's perfect, right, there's still 0-day and novel events that could happen, right? So ultimately, kind of two different things. That the DR is one thing, kind of replication and fast failover, and you kind of have to take a recovery in depth approach to cover both, DR and cyber recovery, right? So, assuming that you did everything that you could to tighten any gaps as far as somebody getting in, right? That ultimately fails you because inevitably none of those things are 100% foolproof, as Mr. Parker, I'm sure, would share, Joe Ross would testify to, where you're needing to go through that recovery. And I think that the keys there are, obviously, did you make sure your backups were immutable? Did you make sure you followed 3-2-1 rules to have additional copies just in case? All those basic, but assuming all those things are checked, right? It's really about how quickly can you execute on that recovery, and how sure are you the point at which to recover, right? Where is the point in time before, the indicators of compromise, right? And how do you make sure that you're recovering safely and cleanly after you know when that point in time is, right? And then being able to validate.